105.1 FM. Enjoy the show.
Balanced, fair, thoughtful. Wave 105 FM.
All right, everyone. Half day. Thank you for tuning into Wave 105.1 FM. We have our community program, Challenge the Status Quo, with Mr. Melvin Wampat Borja, the Executive Director of the Commission on Decolonization. This show is brought to you by BK. BK's double cheeseburger starts with a classic, next up bacon double, and the new rodeo double. At BK, you rule. Welcome to the show.
All right, half a day, and welcome back to Challenge the Status Quo. My name is Melvin Wampat Borja. I'm the Executive Director of the Commission on Decolonization. Thanks to our friends at BK for helping us put this show on. Of course, our friends over at Glimpses for the partnership with the Commission on Decolonization on this community education show. Happy to be back in the studio on a gloomy Monday morning. I like the gloomy, personally. We've been out for a bit. We had the holiday, and I was out for personal reasons, but we're back this week and next week, and we're excited to bring more community content. I gotta say, I feel like it's been on fire, man. It's been on fire, and so there's a lot to talk about. I want to welcome my co-host Byron Uggan. I'm giving him co-host credentials because he's been here enough to not be a guest anymore. Byron, thanks for coming in this morning and helping me to do the 1-2 punch on the show this morning. And thanks to our friends over at the Commission on Decolonization, Harmony Polygonis, Ha'ani St. Nicholas, our crew over there that's been regularly helping us to put all of this content together, of course, along with Byron Uggan here. Byron is the unsung hero. Byron, Harmony, and Ha'ani, they put together all of the show content, help to gather all the research so our facts are sharp. Because we ain't those other guys. Nope, we're not the other guys. But yeah, Byron, I'm happy to have you in the studio today. Kind of helps to have a discussion. I feel like having a conversation helps to make a lot of what is unsensible make sense. So there's so much to talk about. There's been a lot happening on the local front, a lot happening on the national front and the international front. And it all fits. It all ties together. The common denominator here is a self-governing status, which is great for us because that's kind of our bag. You know what I mean? Like, that's what we try to do every single week, is to take these regular community issues that are familiar to a lot of us and help people understand how political status impacts that issue. You know, a lot of times I think we get so consumed in the day-to-day busyness and struggle and hustle of life that, you know, we get consumed with the challenge that's right in front of us. But it's hard to see how that challenge and that problem, that conflict, is rooted in an inequity that runs across the board. And for us, that's always going to be political status. So long as Guam remains in a non-self-governing status, then we remain disempowered to create the change that we wish to see. And so, you know, I think it's cool to see what's happening around the world and how these things affect us, and to be able to, you know, be clear about the impact of Guam's political status on our ability to be change agents or our ability to even just mitigate. I think mitigation has become a bad word to a lot of people in our community, because mitigation means that you've already lost. You're just trying to clean up the mess. You're trying to minimize the damage of the mess, which I think is a unfair position to put a people in. Anyhow, thanks for coming in, Byron. And I'm happy to have this discussion with you. I want to start first with Resolution 117-38. So Senator Parkinson of the Guam Legislature introduced this resolution relative to urging the United States Congress and the Department of Defense, or Department of War, to transition Guam from the Overseas Housing Allowance, which is OHA, referred to as OHA, switching from that system to the Basic Allowance for Housing System, or BAH. So to put this in plain terms, the difference between OHA and BAH, the Overseas Housing Allowance, and Basic Allowance for Housing, is basically it's a lot more complex, but it's basically the amount. So active duty service members are given a housing allowance that is formulaic, basically. And so usually when a active duty enlisted service member is stationed somewhere in the United States, they're given the basic allowance for housing. When they're stationed in an international destination or an overseas destination, then they're given the overseas housing allowance, which is more, right? For obvious reasons. There's a different, calculation for the cost of living. You have to account for the exchange rate and the currency. None of these issues are necessary or necessary to factor in regard to Guam. But because Guam is an unincorporated territory, the ambiguity of Guam being domestic in an international sense or domestic in a foreign sense, foreign in a domestic sense, we often get the application in a different way, right? Or in an incorrect way. And so I would argue that this confusion or this inconsistency by the federal government to treat Guam as foreign in this case is not that different than other places where they treat Guam like it's foreign. Off the top of my head, I think of the Dodea school system, right? The Dodea school system is built for American kids, American dependents of enlisted service members to receive an American education while their parents are stationed overseas. So, for example, if I'm in the army and I get stationed in Germany, I send my kids to a Dodea school so that my kids don't have to go to school in German. Go into the German school system, right? Public or private school system. And so it's a mechanism to allow, continuity of an American education. But in Guam, we use a mirror system to the US DOE. We have to comply with all kind of standards, rules, regulations of the US DOE. English is the official language of Guam, along with Tamoru. And so our system, our school system is conducted primarily in English around an American pedagogy. But there's still Dodea schools. And so, we're foreign in a domestic sense, domestic in a foreign sense. And so this issue that Parkinson is attempting to address is dealing with housing. Now, it's no secret that there has been a housing crisis in Guam. And it's undeniable that the housing crisis that we're experiencing is greatly impacted by this increase in military activity on Guam. So the kind of backdrop of this resolution here is that the United States Congress decided that they wanted to engage in this bilateral negotiation with Japan, approved a military buildup, the closure of Futenma Air Base in Okinawa, and the relocation of thousands of Marines and their dependents from Okinawa to Guam. And this is what we know as the military buildup. And so we're in the thick of the military buildup right now. And what we're seeing is that the projections show that there's a greater demand for housing than what we can provide locally. But what we're experiencing right now is the disparity in resources for housing. And that's primarily in what I mean by that is what can people pay to either rent or own a home. And so because the United States federal government has seen it fit, the U.S. Congress has seen it fit to apply the overseas housing allowance, which is much higher than the basic allowance for housing, it means then that service members, U.S. military personnel who wish to live off base can afford a higher rate of rent than your average Guam citizen. And so what we've seen is the housing market respond, right? The housing market has responded by, of course, raising the average cost of rent. And so you have, military members who basically occupy the upper echelon of rental housing. They occupy the more expensive available units. So Senator Parkinson put this resolution forward to petition Congress, or to urge Congress to change the housing allowance for service members from the overseas housing allowance to the basic allowance for housing, which would basically make it lower. And the rationale is that if they are given less, then the market will respond accordingly and bring the average rent down, which is not, I acknowledge that it's not, I don't think the calculus is necessarily that simple, but nonetheless, I think that it's, it's a worthy discussion at the very least. Yeah. Byron, you covered this quite a bit. What were your thoughts on the outcome of the public hearing and just the conversation around this housing issue?
Sure, and half a day everyone out there in Radio Land, and it's good to be back on the show this morning. Just like to shout out first that I was talking to Mel earlier this morning that we've had this program for over 2 years now.
I know, it's Byron's put me on that this is we're coming up on our 2-year anniversary, and he knows this because it's also his 2-year anniversary coming up with the Commission on Decolonization. Congratulations, Byron! Thank you for your service. I know we don't normally say it in that context, but.
And of course, to give a shout out to the rest of the team, Harmony and Hani. Of course, every week we put this together for the benefit of not only you for the program, but of course for the listening audience. So in terms of this resolution, Senator Parkinson had a public hearing last week on Thursday, January 22nd, at the Guam Congress Building. It was 9:30 a.m.
Right.
It's interesting to see that only, from what we were seeing on the live hearing, that only 3 people showed up, to include yourself.
Right.
Besides Mel, that morning it was Deputy Director Fernando Esteves from the Guam Housing and Urban Renewal Authority, or GURA, and we also had Monty McDowell, who was representing at the time the Guam Association of Realtors. So this is a timely resolution, obviously, as Mel was saying, and this is coming in the midst of an ever-increasing military buildup, not only to include the Marine relocation, but the anticipated construction and implementation of the Enhanced Integrated Air Missile Defense System, which also is seeing a requirement of not only military personnel, but that also includes federal contractors, their own dependents, and of course, the labor sourcing for the construction of the EIMDS, which is spanning existing military installations across the island.
Right.
It's a commendable effort by Senator Parkinson, but it's something that it potentially might not be heard because of the fact that Guam has historically and continued to lack federal representation in both houses of Congress, and no influence on the national presidential election.
Right.
And Congress itself has purview over the National Defense Authorization Act. That's the big military spending bill every fiscal year. And under that big spending bill, which spans, military development not only nationally here in the territories, but internationally, it also includes what happens with the application of the OHA, which applies to Guam and, of course, our fellow 4 unincorporated territories. So we're all being treated, as you were saying earlier, as being foreign in the domestic sense. Right. And it can be argued that the OHA is one of the primary factors that is leading to this cost of living crisis, this unaffordability crisis for rent, and even the prospect or the dream of owning a home for so many of our residents and young families here on our island, because the OHA sets that rate amongst the housing market. And, to be fair and kind, the real estate market would want to match that. That's to their benefit. But that unfortunately leads to this disparity where our people are spending maybe over half of their income just to make rent every month. Right.
I think it's very similar, I think, to the conversation on minimum wage. Everybody wants higher minimum wage. I don't think anybody is against earning more per hour at a base, right? But the business community's argument against minimum wage is that any increase to minimum wage increases the cost of business owners to stay open. And so, it's a give and take, just like in any situation. And to be objective here, there was testimony in opposition of this resolution to lower or to switch the housing allowance from overseas to basic. And that was given by the Guam Association of Realtors, represented by Mr. Monty McDowell. He argued that switching would create a strong financial incentive for military members to compete for cheaper rental units that are now occupied by island civilians, and it would create a competition between the two groups. And they're saying that, he argued that right now the military dominates the high end of the local market, but that if they were given less allowance, then that would push them to compete with the mid-range to lower rental units and put them in direct competition with the civilian market. And that was I'm summarizing here, but that was the gist of what, his opposition was, and the Guam Realtors Association of Realtors argument was against. Now, subsequently, Mr. Fernando Esteves, the deputy director of GURA, argued the opposite. He argued that, that this is because the housing allowance in nature is not, it's a subsidy, right? Like it's not their money. They don't, they're not pulling money out of their paycheck. It's given. It's a baseline given to all the soldiers. And so the scenario is that you lose it or you lose it. So and that's part of what, at least from what I surmise, that's what part of the argument that Mr. Aceves was making was that, with such a high floor in the amount of money that is given per service member, and an increase if they have dependents or if they're married, right? That forces the market to respond in kind. I mean, and I think that that's a fair assessment. I think that any family that owns a property that they rent is aware that you can make more if you rent to a military family. I mean, it's an obviously complicated situation, and I think that there's no magic fix for this. I mean, even this resolution, should it pass, the Commission on Decolonization spoke out in support of this resolution. But we also preface that this is just another mitigative measure that does not address the core of the problem, right? The fundamental problem is that Guam is not fully self-governing through any mechanism. Guam is not fully self-governing as a fully integrated, equal member of the United States Union. It is not sovereign or self-governing as a freely associated nation, nor as an independent country. And so as a territory, we just don't have all the tools in our toolbox to be able to make this a fair and equitable solution or a situation for our island and our people. And I think it's frustrating because we hear this all the time, right? Guam is so important to national security. Guam plays a really critical role in the stability and security of the region. We have to have this military presence in Guam, not just for the protection of Guam, but for the protection of the nation, the greater nation, and the nation's interests. This is, I think, very, very common rhetoric, common sentiment. But it's incomplete because we're not accounting for the burden that it places on our community playing this role. And I think that's the frustrating piece for me, is that, it is what it is. I mean, I think that this situation has been bubbling way before you or me. It will continue to after you and I. And so I think a lot of us are just in a place where, we're just trying to make sense of the now and trying to figure out what it means for tomorrow. But I think it's clear that if Guam was self-governing through any mechanism, if Guam was a state, if Guam was independent, if Guam was freely associated, then it's a whole new set of rules. And that's the part that I wanted to talk about next. Really, is given we're not gonna make the the exact kind of path to solve this complex calculus on the housing allowance and the difference and how the market will or won't respond. I think that's to be seen. But I think what's clear is that if we were fully self-governing, that there's a different way that we solve this. And it changes drastically, because we're not talking about trying to go back and fix it retroactively, but we're addressing it at the onset, right? Which is what it should be. And I think that's, I know it's normally not constructive to be like, well, in hindsight, if we would have done this and done that. But I think in this scenario, it's necessary for us to look at it in hindsight. And so, if you will, it's just kind of humor me in this. What do you think changes in this scenario, right? The situation with the housing crisis in Guam. If Guam was fully self-governing, whether it be through a state mechanism, a compact of free association, or an independent nation, if Guam was sovereign and fully self-governing prior to the buildup, okay, let's just, for the sake of the conversation, let's just say the buildup has not happened, okay? Buildup has not happened, but we know that the United States has the intent to to close this base in collaboration with Japan and Futenma, and then relocate it, and Guam is an option. Okay, they want Guam. They want it to relocate in Guam. So let's just say that we're back in, what was that, 2010? So we're back in 2010, and the United States has already negotiated this with Japan, and they're pretty set. Okay, we want Guam. What does it take? Now, let's just say because it's too big, we're not going to tackle this in just the radio show time, but let's just focus on the housing situation, right? It's predictable. We know we only have so much housing in Guam. We know what the median is that families can afford, average families can afford, and we know that there's going to be an impact, right? We know already from the onset that if this was to happen, that the service members are going to be given the overseas housing allowance. We know that they'll be able to afford much more than the average local family, and we know it's inevitable that we're going to have a housing crisis. So let's say that we're fully self-governing. How does this change if we're to, what is the build-up today look like if we're sovereign? Let's just say we agreed, yeah, let's just go down this path and let's play ball with the United States, and let's let them have their build-up, but on our terms. What do you think the housing situation looks like under a fully self-governing status?
Sure. And I'll just preface by saying, not a housing, business, real estate expert.
Yeah,
but, as a member or a staff for the commission, we can talk about the self-governing piece. So
right.
what Mel, or what you're kind of alluding to, is the fact that we are going to be under a framework where we are consenting and we are negotiating
right.
the terms, particularly to housing when it comes to the military relocation. Because as we've seen with a lot of federal decisions, I mean, the hot button issue the past couple of months has been deep sea mining, which is
right.
also in this.
And we're going to talk about that soon.
Sure, yeah.
We are.
Yes, and also the military buildup at whole. We have been inundated over the decades, really now at
right.
this point, with comment workshops, community town halls, where it's just, this is the deal, these are the graphs, these are the maps, this is all the impacts. But ultimately,
right.
we can only comment our concerns and only hope to have to create mechanisms to mitigate these things.
Right.
So even before this would have happened in this hypothetical scenario, under a fully self-governing status, we would be consenting and negotiating the terms
right.
of this issue. And when it comes to, I guess, starting with statehood, is that the idea of the OHA wouldn't be an issue at all,
right?
Because
it wouldn't.
The basic allowance for housing applies to any domestic jurisdiction,
right?
Which also includes the non-contiguous states of Hawaii
right.
and Alaska.
And ironically, we're normally included in that lump, right? When you say domestic, yeah. and like including the non-contiguous states, normally when they're willing to throw in Alaska and Hawaii in there, then they will just throw the territories in for good measure. Oh yeah, why not? Guam, American Samoa, Puerto Rico, yep. USVI, yeah, include them too. And I think that's the hypocrisy, right? Is that if, because we're a territory, it's just kind of easy to switch that designation at a whim. And we're experiencing that now. But I think that's a great point, right? If we were a state, then right off the bat, overseas housing allowance is not even an argument. It's not even an issue. You couldn't, even if they wanted to, they couldn't apply that to Guam. But it's only our status as a territory and not a fully integrated member of the union that consideration is completely ignored. Okay, so if we were, and then of course, if we were, let's go into free association. If we were freely associated, the premise is that we would have a compact, right? I would argue that this would have been a key component of our compact negotiations. Let's just say that Guam was, let's just say for the sake of argument, Guam was already a compact state, like FSM, like RMI, like Palau. And all of us were renegotiating our new 20-year compact. I mean, I would imagine if I'm the government of Guam, I'm not negotiating a compact without the consideration of the housing situation in regard to the buildup. Yes. And so in that mechanism, I'm putting it in the compact, right? I mean, it's the only thing that makes the most sense. It's the one thing that gives our priorities and our stance any kind of teeth, because the compact essentially is a contract, right? And so if we are freely associated and we're talking about buildup, I'm not agreeing to a buildup unless we have contingencies to address the housing crisis. I mean, I think that you could go to town at that point. I think it's a little different if you're a state, right? Because if you're a state, it's just kind of like if you're a state, then what's happening in Guam is no different than, Camp Pendleton in California or Kaneohe Marine Corps Base in Hawaii. I think it's a little bit more like Kaneohe because you have the indigenous issue kind of dovetailed in whether you like it or not. And so that definitely makes it a little bit more complex. But if you're freely associated, there are going to be terms to the agreement. And I think that's pretty straightforward. Now, of course, the last one would be an independent status, in which case there are a number of examples that we have seen throughout history, and one that's very close to us in the Philippines, right? The Philippines had a marine installation in Subic Bay. And one of the kind of glaring differences in that situation was the existence of SOFA, which is the Status of Visiting Forces Agreement. This is something that I think a lot of people are unaware of. What is a SOFA, other than, the thing that your friend sleeps on when he's in the doghouse? But, usually an independent nation that is, choosing to have a relationship with the United States through its military will execute what we call a Status of Forces Agreement. And a Status of Forces Agreement is essentially a contract in the terms of how the military presence is going to conduct its business and how it's going to deal with the local population and the local government. And I think it's important to point out that in the independent arrangement, right, like with the Philippines, the SOFA is essentially what brought that arrangement to an end, right? The Philippine government was dissatisfied with the way that the United States government was executing their SOFA and their presence in Subic Bay. And, there are problems just like any other place, just like us. Like, I think that's the frustrating thing to me when we talk about the buildup in Guam, is that it's quick to turn into, oh, well, if you're critical of the military presence in Guam, then it means that you're against me and my family because my family serves in the military. And I don't think it's that simple. I don't think that, just like how the housing situation, the calculus is not that simple. I don't think that people who are critical of the way that the military conducts its business in Guam are against our local men and women who serve in the armed forces. I think that our local men and women who serve in the armed forces are doing a job just like any other person. And they're not the boss of the job. It's just the reality. No matter how high ranked you are, let's just keep in mind that the commander-in-chief, you couldn't even be the commander-in-chief if you wanted to. Isn't that crazy? I think that's crazy. I always think that I'm totally going to I'm totally just departing and going off on a tangent here real quick. Side note. If when I always think about this, when for like your average little kid who's elementary school, right, and it's career day or whatever, and you're talking about big dreams. When I grow up, I'm gonna be a doctor, I'm gonna be a lawyer, and there's always that kid is like, when I grow up, I'm gonna be the president. I always thought that it was crazy that our little boys and girls, they don't get to have that dream. Yeah. They don't get to have that dream. They're not allowed to have that dream simply because they're statutory citizens.
And they were born here.
Yeah, and they're born here. Isn't that crazy? I always think that that's wild. Like, maybe this is in the bigger scheme of things, maybe this doesn't matter, okay? But I believe that it's an important distinction. I mean, you're telling me that our kids are not worthy of having a big dream like that simply because they are inferior citizens. And let's just call it what it is, okay? You are inferior citizens. Your status is inferior. And that's the way that it was built. I think most people just take it at a blanket acceptance that, oh, we're U.S. citizens because Guam is a territory. That's good. That's good because it guarantees us rights. It guarantees you most rights, but not all of them. And I think that that's an important distinction that our people need to understand. And, that's something. And again, this is not about being anti-military or anti-American. I think that this is about being pro-equality. This is about being pro-equity. About human and civil rights. And so, if you want to be on the opposite team, that's up to you, Home Slice. Me, I'm going to be pro-humanity. And if I'm going to be pro-humanity, then I'm also going to be pro-Tomoru. So, we're gonna kind of pivot real quick. I think we appropriately gave Senator Parkinson his props on the housing resolution.
Maybe one more thing.
Oh, one more.
If you could humor
yes,
me
please.
as well. Kind of the public sentiment regarding housing and public services infrastructure. There was a post poll done last week. The results just came in this Monday morning. They run it every week. So last week's question was, do you believe Guam's housing and public services can keep up with the expanding military presence?
Right.
The total votes were over 1,000, and the overwhelming majority of 83.5% said no.
Right.
Only 10.6% said yes, and almost 6% were kind of on the fence of being not sure. So, I mean, 1,000 people contributed to this weekly poll. That's a
pretty good sample size.
Yeah, sample size to really address kind of the public sentiment regarding the imposition of the military buildup in housing.
Right.
Because I think principally this issue is the fact that it is a contributing factor to the exodus of our people.
Oh, I would agree with that. Absolutely. I would absolutely agree with that. Which I gotta bring it up was during the question portion of the public hearing, Senator Parkinson asked Mr. McDowell from the Guam Association of Realtors about what happens to these because he had made the argument. Mr. McDowell made the argument that what happens to these investors, these people who had put in significant capital into outfitting a home so that it could qualify for OHA and then be rented, right? Be accepted as a viable rental, and that they could then open themselves up to this market. So what happens if you lower the amount, they invested a certain amount, thinking that they would be able to recoup their funds by renting at a certain threshold. And now that threshold is lower, and now they can't make the mortgage payments to cover their investment, and now the house goes into foreclosure. And so he argued that you're going to create this kind of domino effect, right? Where all of these investors won't be able to afford to, recoup their funds. They'll have to foreclose. And then you have all of these, homes that are just going to sit vacant because no one's going to rent them. And then Deputy Director Estevez came back and said, well, what if that was to happen, then predictably the banking institution will go to auction. They'll go to auction to try to recoup their losses. And let's just say that they foreclose on a home that's valued at $500,000. And if it goes to auction, they close the sale at $100,000 less than its value. He argued that this creates a scenario where local families who had relocated because they can't afford to stay here anymore. What if that opens the door for a family to come home? to come home and say, well, if I can, $100,000 less on this home, that I can afford. And maybe it brings a family back home. And, I think I thought that was a fair argument. And I also thought that's something that really motivates and interests me. I think that the brain drain in Guam, I believe, is real. It frustrates me when people talk about, our best, we need our best and our brightest. Like, man, half our best and our brightest relocated to the States because the cost of living is lower, And so it's tough, it's tough when we want our best and our brightest, but, it's unsustainable to live in Guam. And I think it takes a lot. I think it's clear that it takes a lot to survive in Guam under these circumstances. There are more Tamoros today living in the continental U.S. than there are in Guam, which I think is a wild statistic. If you think about that, more Tamoros live in the continental U.S. than in the motherland. That is crazy. But, that's the reality of our situation right now. And I think that the more that it becomes unattainable to live here long term, the deeper we get into this imposition. And I really believe that it is an imposition. I think that it's clear that the military buildup was not as advertised. I mean, I remember this pretty clearly. 2010 was a long time ago, but I remember 2010. I remember being the crazy guy in the news, like, man, there's that guy talking all this mess about the U.S. military, and all these families were so mad at me because they thought that I was disrespecting their family member. And that's not what it was about. Again, it's not as simple as that. And that's never was what we're about. I think it's clear, if even from an objective standpoint, that there's just not enough. We don't have enough to provide for our own people, and now we're being asked to provide for a whole new population. And that was the promise by the federal government, right? Was that we're going to make this work for Guam. We're going to invest in Guam's infrastructure. That's what the Chamber of Commerce told us when the buildup was first being talked about publicly, that this is going to be an economic boom for the island, that people are going to really benefit, that there's going to be all these jobs and people are going to be living well. But not only are there less jobs available, but the cost of living has gone up. So, I mean, again, the calculus is not that simple, and I'm no mathematician, but something ain't adding up, man. I'm just saying. We got a phone call right in time before the top of the hour. Hafaday Joe Malik, you're on the air. You want to chime in here, sir? Do you mind, senor, if you turn your radio down a little bit? Hello?
I don't know.
Did we lose Joe?
I think we might have lost him.
I kind of still hear his echo. I don't know. Dispensa to Senor Joe Malik. If you were on the line, if you are no longer on the line, you got to call us back.
Yeah.
Oh, there you are.
Yeah,
Oh, he's there.
Yeah, good.
Half a day. We can hear you now.
Mostly people either retired or military that stay back in the States.
Most of the people who are retired military stay back in the States.
Yeah, most
Yes,
of them
I agree with that.
stay back at the States.
Right, which I think is also, great conversation around Guam's political status, because as a territory, Guam does not have the amount of veteran services as compared to any one of the 50 states. And I think it's clear, the numbers don't lie, that our people who are entitled to military benefits cannot get services here in Guam that are necessary for them to continue living in these circumstances. And so you're right, a lot of military service members choose to stay in the continental U.S. simply because they get better services there. A lot of our families have relocated from Guam. They retired from the military, moved back to Guam, realized that they're not going to get full coverage or full service, and they need those medical benefits. And so they leave to get those benefits, to get that care. You can't blame anybody who leaves Guam because they need medical treatment. Right. I think that's a fair point. Seduus Masi Sinyat for chiming in. If anybody out there is interested in getting in on the conversation, the number is 671-922-1051 or 1052. If you want to WhatsApp us, you can text it to the 1051 number. I was going to pivot and start bringing in the next topic on this, but we're about 9 minutes out from the top of the hour. So we're just going to stay on this for a little bit longer. I wanted to go back, Byron, to to this poll.
Yes.
And just I think it's clear that when we look at the response on whether people believe that Guam's housing and public services can keep up with the expanding military presence, and 83.5% out of 1,000 said no. I think that says a lot about the vote of confidence by our people in regard to, what our capacity is. And so, again, like I think that no matter what your stance is on the buildup, whether you love it or you hate it or you're somewhere in between, and even in the wider context of the national security conversation, I think it's clear that a lot of our people are dissatisfied with the way that this is playing out. And it's tough. I think it's tough because, back in 2010, this is not what they said it was going to be. And I'm always curious. I'm always curious to be like, Citizen A, back in 2010, you said that I was crazy. How do you feel now? How do you feel now? When I was back in 2010, I always had this idea. I got to say that it sucks that the AG Moylan got better resources than me, because that was my idea, man. I wanted that billboard spot. Back in 2010, I wanted where AG billboard is at. I wanted that spot. And that's exactly what I wanted to do. What he's doing, like, not exactly. Minus the racism. Minus the racism, that's what I wanted to do. But conceptually, like, marketing-wise, right, I always thought it'd be cool to have a billboard up on Marine Drive in that spot because it's the highest congestion point, right? Have a billboard spot that rotates every month or so. And I always wanted to do it with direct messaging and questioning around the buildup. And I wanted to put messaging out there that made people think about what is the real impact of the buildup. Beyond all the usual conversation about jobs and, the economy and blah, 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 right? Like just simple things like traffic. Like having a message like, how long have you been sitting at this traffic light? How much longer will you sit when there are enough cars to support an additional 30,000 people, 35,000 people? And I mean, if you want to know what time it is, go check AutoSpot's lot. AutoSpot and like a lot of other, car dealerships have expanded their storage capacity, their parking capacity of vehicles that are set to be sold, right? They're all bringing in a lot more vehicles because the market is expanding, right? There's a whole bunch of people who are coming to Guam and they're not going to ship their vehicle. And some do. I mean, I think that's the other kind of X factor, right? Is that the military will pay for you to ship your vehicle if you're being stationed in Guam. And I mean, Guam's not getting bigger. Our roads are getting better for sure. Absolutely. Shout out to DPW for doing the work, the thankless work. Nobody ever thanks DPW enough. They get mad because there's a pothole, but they don't get mad when they don't get happy when the new road is paved. But thank you, DPW, and all the hardworking men and women over there. Shout out to Vince Ariola, the director of DPW, Linda Ibanez, the deputy director. You folks have been doing a fine job, and I appreciate you. So the roads are expanding. They're definitely getting better. But, I mean, there's only so much road. And there's still only, 31 miles of it. 31 miles long. And all the road that can fit in there. And, it's just like the housing market, right? Like, there's only so many houses. And we just don't have enough for all the people. There's only so much road. Can't fit all these cars. And then we're not even talking about what happens after the cars are done. You notice that it's like the mystery. There's like all these new vehicles. What happened to the old ones? It's like they're in the jungle somewhere. They just go down south and you find them. They're parked on the side of the road somewhere in somebody's yard. So some brocanic is like, boy, don't throw that. Don't junk that, boy. I need that for parts. But I mean, you know, resources are finite here. Land is finite. And that applies to so much, not just housing, not just roads, but even waste. You know what I mean? Like, we're still trying to figure out the better way to deal with our waste other than put it in this one place and then bury it. Oh, man. It's killing me, man. It's killing me. But, you know, I think that I commend Senator Parkinson for engaging in the conversation, because I believe that it's not as simple as go talk to your delegate. And quite frankly, our delegate can do a lot better than this. I'm disappointed. Being a member of the Armed Services Committee, like Byron mentioned, you know, this is the committee that has oversight of the NDAA. You know, this is built into the NDAA. And so, you know, there's so many other things among these issues relevant to housing that should be addressed at a congressional level even before it gets onto the president's desk. Yeah. You know, and so but you know, to be fair to our delegate, what you really going to do as a non-voting rep? You know, and I think that it's insulting for our people. I think that our people should be insulted. They should be upset. I mean, this should bother you at the highest level, that, you know, you're not even important enough to have a voting voice in the room. And I mean, even at that, right, let's just say that our delegate is an ace in the Armed Services Committee. That thing's still got to pass a vote on the floor, still got to get a vote in the Senate, and still got to get up to the president's desk, you know? And so I think that that's kind of part and parcel, right? Our votes on the floor, our electoral college votes, like all of these votes matter, you know. Without a voice in the halls of government that, you know, that decide our fates, I mean, we're just always going to be at a disadvantage. And I think that's tough. It's a tough pill to swallow, and it makes me angry. Anybody else got heartburn? Oh man. But you know, we haven't even. We'll get into it in the next hour because we're coming up on the 2-minute mark. But I mean, thinking about what has been happening on the national front. I mean, everything from deep sea mining to the invasion of Venezuela to the potential acquisition of Greenland. You know, I think that all of these issues have clear impacts to Guam, and they force us, they should force us to ask some really difficult questions about what does our status mean in a situation like this, in context like this, right? If President Trump can say, well, I need to just have Greenland, you just come up off it, let me have it, you know what I mean? And then on the other side say that, you know, just because you landed here 500 years ago doesn't mean you own the land. I'm just over here like, did anybody catch that? Can I get a screenshot? I mean, but you know, I think that there are a lot of kind of clear opportunities to connect the dots for us. I think the question is, are we connecting them? Anyway, I just went off for like the last 20 minutes, and like I seen Byron over here breathing a few times, but I just rifle firing, rapid fire.
No, you're on a roll.
I'm on one this morning, guys. We're rolling up right onto the 30-second mark. We got to take a real quick commercial break, but we will be back for another hour of political status talk. It's always a fun time with us, so stay tuned.
In-depth conversation and inspiring stories on arts, culture, travel, and more, along with features that make you smile, because there's always something new under the sun. Follow and listen to our Sunday morning podcast on the free Odyssey app or wherever you get your podcasts.
This is CBS News on the Hour, your home for original reporting.
I'm Heather Bosch. Outrage in Minnesota after a second U.S. citizen was shot dead by federal immigration officers. Minneapolis Police Chief Brian O'Hara.
This is the third shooting now in less than 3 weeks. The Minneapolis Police Department went the entire year last year, recovering about 900 guns from the street, arresting hundreds and hundreds of violent offenders, and we didn't shoot anyone.
O'Hara on CBS's Face the Nation. Renee Good was fatally shot earlier this month. A Venezuelan national was shot in the leg during a fight with immigration officers. Later yesterday, ICU nurse Alex Preddy was shot dead. FBI Director Kash Patel on Fox News about the latest investigation.
DHS and HSI are the lead, and the FBI is processing the physical evidence, so we're in possession of the firearm, which is going to go to our laboratory. But as Secretary Noem said, no one who wants to be peaceful shows up at a protest with a firearm that is loaded with 2 full magazines.
Noem has not said whether Preddy had drawn the weapon. He had a license to carry it. Severe weather has much of the U.S. in its grips. CBS's Chanel Call reports.
The winter storm pounded dozens of states from Texas into New England Sunday.
This is really crazy. I can barely even see. I was thinking I needed to bring some goggles or something.
Crews spent the day working on the massive cleanup efforts to take some of the danger out of leaving the house.
The snow just keep coming down harder and harder. No matter how you push the snow, it just keep coming.
In Dallas, an extreme cold warning was set to remain in effect through Tuesday.
Find Energy reports more than 840,000 customers are without power. FlightAware lists more than 11,000 flights canceled. CBS's Chris Van Cleve says airports are working to clear out snow and ice.
There's a lot of activity out there. Snow plows are trying to clear as much of this winter weather away from the key access points so that when conditions improve, flights can resume.
President Trump has said he doesn't care to renew the free trade deal known as USMCA with Canada, but Canadian ambassador to the U.S. Kirsten Hillman says the deal is not doomed.
Job number one is to do no harm to this agreement, which is the economic foundation of our continental partnership and leads to very important U.S. competitiveness and Canadian and Mexican competitiveness vis-a-vis other parts of this world.
Hillman on CBS's Face the Nation. The New England Patriots have punched their ticket to their 12th Super Bowl with a 10-7 win over the Denver Broncos in the AFC Championship game. New England plays either Seattle or L.A.
Follow and listen to CBS Mornings on the go on the free Odyssey app or wherever you get your podcasts.
Okay, I have to tell you, I was just looking on eBay where I go for all kinds of things I love, and there it was.
That hologram trading card. One of the rarest, the last one I needed for my set. Shiny like the
designer handbag of my dreams. One of a kind. eBay had it, and now everyone's asking, ooh, where'd you get your
windshield wipers? eBay has all the parts that fit my car. No more annoying, just beautiful.
Millions of finds, each with a story. eBay. Things people love.
With the new IHOP value menu, $6 is all it takes to go to your happy place, where stacks of pancakes with bacon and eggs are just $6 every day. French toast, sausage, and eggs are, you guessed it, $6. And fluffy omelets come with a side of pancakes and only cost $6. Go to your happy plates every day at IHOP. $7 in some locations. Available every day for a limited time at participating restaurants in the U.S. Hours may vary. No substitutions. Not valid with other discounts or promotions. Prices may vary.
After a 7% drop in tourist traffic last year in Las Vegas, one place is taking a new gamble.
Hotels and casinos in Las Vegas are battling a fall in international visitors and rising prices.
I just think that prices in some places maybe got too high. This is our way to try to attract people to our property.
What Derek Stevens, the owner and CEO of the 120-year-old Golden Gate Hotel, has done is remove all live dealers. Every table game is now electronic.
The future of table games is somewhat limited if every table game is going to have a minimum of a $25 bet associated with it.
Table minimums at his place are now $1, $2, or $3. Steve Kathan, CBS News.
Nevada's casinos contribute nearly $60 billion to the state's economy. According to the Nevada Independent, the money's a top source of funding for state and local governments and is said to be the bedrock of the Las Vegas economy. I'm Heather Bosch, CBS News.
Wesley Financial Group is not a law firm.
Ask yourself this question. Is it really worth holding on to that timeshare that you know you need to get rid of? Here's the truth. The average maintenance fee just went up over 17%. That could have been 117%, and there's nothing you can do about it. When you buy a timeshare, you give them a blank check for annual maintenance and assessment fees. I'm Chuck McDowell, founder of Wesley Financial Group. For 15 years, I've helped over 50,000 families cancel their timeshare. Not sell it, not transfer it, cancel it. Did you buy a timeshare because they told you it was a great investment and your maintenance fees would never go up? That's a lie. Are you ready to get rid of your timeshare once and for all? Simply call us and I'll send you our timeshare exit kit that explains all your options for cancellation.
Call Wesley now for your timeshare exit kit. 800-932-5858. That's 800-932-5858. 800-932-5858.
Stay sharp, stay curious, stay connected. Wave 105, the talk of Guam. Glimpses Media.
Burger King's double cheeseburger line is here. The Classic Double, Bacon Double, and Rodeo Double. The Classic features 2 flame grilled beef topped with pickles, ketchup, mustard, and melty American cheese on a warm sesame seed bun. The Bacon has pickles, ketchup, mustard, melty American cheese, and crispy savory bacon. And the Rodeo, filled with melty American cheese, tangy barbecue sauce, and onion rings. Make it a meal with cheesy tots and a refreshing Coca-Cola. BK's new double cheeseburgers, available for a limited time only at BK. You rule.
The game is on! The Power 98 Step Up Challenge has begun, and we're happy to welcome this year's competitors. The Ukuru Bulldogs class of 2026, the Simon Sanchez High School cheerleading squad, the Ukuru Junior class, the St. John's class of 2026, the OHS Pro Start team, the reigning and defending champs, the T10 Titan Senior class, and the Ukuru High School freshman team. These teams are getting their videos made and ready for your vote, so stay tuned. Voting starts on February 1st on all Power 98 digital platforms, including Power98.com. The best of the best are ready to go. The 2026 Power 98 Step Up Challenge is presented by the Acania Shopping Center, the Bank of Guam, the Guam Army National Guard, and brought to you by Domino's, Wave 105, and Route 99. Thousands of bucks are on the line for Guam's high school students in the Power 98 Step Up Challenge.
The views and opinions expressed on this program are those of the show hosts, guests, and callers, and do not necessarily reflect the views of the staff or management of Wave 105.1 FM, Glimpses Media, or our partners. We strive to provide quality, respectful, and engaging content, and we welcome you to participate in the conversation. Thank you for tuning in to Wave 105.1 FM. Enjoy the show.
All right, everyone. Thank you for coming back. We're tuned into the second half of our community program, Challenge the Status Quo with Mr. Melvin Wampat Bora. We want to thank BK. BK's Double Cheeseburger starts with the classic. Next up, Bacon Double and the new Rodeo Double at BK. You rule. Welcome to the show.
All right. Thanks, Ulysses, for holding us down in the production room. Thanks to our friends over at BK and our friends at Glimpses. We're back with one more hour of Challenge the Status Quo. My name is Melvin, and this is Byron. And we've been talking a lot about, political status, of course, but in the context of military activity and impacts to our community, particularly around housing. So we started off the show talking about this resolution from Senator Parkinson, Resolution 117-38, to urge the United States Congress and DOD to transition Guam from the overseas housing allowance system to the basic allowance for housing. And a lot of this is really about, what the supply and demand look like, what people can and cannot afford, and creating this disparity, this imposed disparity between these two communities. But, we just like always, we ended the conversation about, really focusing on our agency in this discussion or in this situation. The challenge, of course, is that Guam, with a territorial status, a non-fully self-governing status, is really disempowered in creating the terms or setting the tone and the terms of how we're going to have a relationship with the U.S. Armed Forces. And, we see this in a lot of different areas of concern for the people. Some people are concerned about housing and the availability of housing, of land use, but, also impacts to the environment, which I think have been really big in the community, because a lot of people are recognizing that there are these environmental impacts, in a lot of ways, irreversible environmental impacts that we're being burdened with, that don't have any reasonable mitigation or satisfactory mitigation. And I think even in a lot of ways, there are a lot of people in our community who are dissatisfied with a system that requires us to mitigate rather than to consent. And that's, for me, that's the biggest piece, right? Is that I'm not the one who's going to decide what our relationship is like with the federal government, with the military in particular. I think that that's a collective responsibility for the community. And, I have my own opinions on what it should be, but I think that, and just like other people do, but I think we can all agree that it's fundamentally better for all of us if our relationship is one that's based on consent rather than consultation. I think consultation versus consent is just insulting. And I don't, I don't feel like it's, you shouldn't have to come up with a substantive justification for why you prefer consent over consultation. And that's one of the things that frustrates me about the way that we exist in this scenario. Being a non-self-governing territory, being, a possession of the United States, and having this understanding that, because the United States owns Guam, they can do whatever they please. And of course, the biggest impact we see is in militarization. But that obviously is also being applied to now deep sea mining, which a lot of people have been railing about in the community, which I think is appropriate. And we've always argued, our stance has always been that we can solve all of these problems with an act of genuine self-determination. That because if we are to self-determine, we're only choosing from a list of fully self-governing statuses. And that's what our referendum or the Guam law that built the framework for a referendum, that's how it was proposed, was that we would vote on a political status, and the only statuses that we would choose from would be self-governing statuses. And that's why, for those of you that wonder, whatever happened to Commonwealth, why won't Commonwealth be on a ballot? That's the reason why. The answer is because Commonwealth is not a fully self-governing status. And we've seen that in the case of CNMI and Puerto Rico, right? Both have become Commonwealths over the years, and both have been utterly dissatisfied with their level of self-government. And it's been clear that despite their better efforts, the federal government, using that Commonwealth status and the inferiority of that status, has really taken advantage of the two nations. And so, Commonwealth wouldn't be an option for us, though Commonwealth would likely be a transitionary status. Anyhow, within this conversation around political self-determination, there are two other things that happen in the legislature through Senator Parkinson. I've joked earlier that we appropriately gave Senator Parkinson his flowers on his resolution to address the housing allowance issue. And now we're going to go to town because I don't like these other two bills. I'm just going to be straight up with you guys. I completely disagree with Senator Parkinson on his two other bills. One is a bill to, I got the reference here, right? Yes. One is a bill to, he's trying to create an activation vote, yes. Right? Basically what it is the bill is proposing to put a question on the ballot through, referendum, right, in this coming election. So the election in November, if his bill is successful, he wants to put an additional question on the 2026 ballot that would ask the voters of Guam, do you want to vote on Guam's political status in 2028? Yes or no? Now, his argument is that this is an activation vote, right? But he's saying that if the people say yes, then we know that we're going to have a vote. And he's trying to use the referendum as a mechanism basically to authorize the vote, the official referendum, which I have argued, both as an individual and as the Commission on Decolonization, we have argued collectively that this is an unnecessary action. We don't need to have an activation vote because we already activated the vote. We already authorized the vote. And we did that in 1997, when the Guam legislature passed the law to create the Commission on Decolonization. It also created the framework for a political status referendum. And in that referendum, and this is the same law that was challenged by the Davis case and was defeated in the Ninth Circuit Court. But I think the point remains that our people have spoken. I think it's redundant. I think it's redundant to ask a question that we've already answered. And we've answered it by saying, yes, we want to have this vote. What we didn't say is when we want to have the vote. We wanted to reserve that right to decide that ourselves, which is why I believe that the 1997 law only put parameters that the referendum would have to be held during a general election.
Yes. And that's the interesting part of this bill, because if this passes, as you were saying earlier, and is put on the ballot this year,
right,
it is a big general election to include the gubernatorial election, all the senators in Congress.
Right.
But if this is activated, right, which we're arguing against,
right,
of course, it's scheduled for 2028.
Which would be only a senatorial, congressional, and AG election.
Yeah. Or
right?
no, not AG.
Not AG.
So
sorry.
we would quantify this as being a midterm
election, right?
And typically, not only here in Guam but nationally, midterm elections have poor performances.
Yeah, voter turnout.
turnout.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean it's night and day, and everybody knows that when Adelup is up for grabs, more voters come out.
Yes.
And I think that's what you want, right? In a political status referendum, I believe, is different than a regular election in that you're asking a fundamental question that should be immune to party politics.
Yes.
And as much as I can't stand when senators are or any elected officials kind of wishy-washy on the political status question, and they say things like, oh, well, that's not for me to decide. That's for the voters to decide. And you don't even want to have an opinion. I mean, come on. You're an intelligent person, supposedly. You're an elected official. You should have a position. But nonetheless, right, like I think that what's beautiful about Guam's movement for political status resolution is that it has historically been a bipartisan issue, a nonpartisan issue, right? Like it don't matter, Democrat or Republican, we all agree that Guam should be self-governing. And I think that that's a beautiful history. Like when you look at the political record of Guam in the last like 30, 40, 50 years, I mean, it's clear that our people want to self-govern. It's clear that our people, Democrat or Republican, believe in these principles of self-government, these values, these basic tenets of self-government. I always like to point to kind of the litmus tests for each party along our trail of decolonization work and political self-determination work. You can easily identify both Democrat and Republican advocates for Tsamoru self-determination and for advocating for a self-governing political status. And it never mattered, who was in power in the legislature, who had the majority, or who was in power in Adelup, Democrat or Republican, which is different than a lot of other non-self-governing territories. I think a lot of other non-self-governing territories throughout the world, their status trail changes with shifts in power from party to party. And that's never been the case for Guam. Well, up until now. Now that may not be the case, but I guess we'll see. So anyway, I wanted to talk real briefly about, because there's another troubling bill from Senator Parkinson that I want to talk about. But for this activation vote, What's the status on this vote? Has he got a hearing on this vote?
Not yet. So just to provide this info to the public, I think it was reported in the news already, but this was just introduced last week, Thursday, the 22nd. Since it is a bill with an election in nature,
Right.
it will most likely be referred to the Committee on Elections, which is currently chaired by Senator Tilla Taitigui.
Mhm.
And just for the public to know, the other members in this committee, besides Senator Taitigui, are Senator Perez, Senator Barnett, Senator Terlahi, our Speaker Frank Bloss Jr., and Senator Shelley Calvo. So that's the current composition of legislative members
Right.
within the Committee on Elections. It's also important to now just circle back to what we were saying about if this happens and occurs during a quote-unquote midterm election. I'm just going to bring up a stat from the last midterm, which we had in 2024. So it was reported that there was an all-time low turnout of voters of about 48.3% at the general.
Right.
And this was less than almost any other general election dating back all the way to the 80s.
Right. And I mean, I think the last election wasn't it a historical low?
Yes.
I mean, that's crazy. If you think about, I think that's the more concerning thing, right? Is that I think it's clear that there are less and less people who are investing in public government. You know what I mean? In the process, in participating in a representative democracy. And I think that's it's not a good sign. It's not a good sign when your electorate is losing faith in the system.
Yep.
And I think that should be a wake-up call to a lot of our political leaders. You know, I think that there's this clear desire for change. And I don't think that, I don't think that the people have been satisfied with the leadership up until this point. And obviously I think there are some people who are satisfied with certain leaders and dissatisfied with others, but I think it's less about individual leaders and more about the system as a collective. Mm-hmm. And I mean, that's the role that we elect these people to play.
Yes.
Right? We don't want to, each of us individually, we're not going to play the party negotiation. But that's your gig. You know what I mean? We elected you to do that and to represent our interests. And so I think it would be telling to see what is the public response to this proposed action. I personally think that activating the vote is a waste of public resources. We've already spoken, we've already said this is what we want and this is how we want to do it. And it's not, to me, it's less about the legal challenge and the defeat in the Ninth Circuit Court and more about what did our government ask for? Because the bill that was challenged by Davis and was defeated in the Ninth Circuit Court, that bill went through the public process just like any other bill that gets signed into law. There was a public hearing for it. There was public discourse on it. And, just like now, any constituent can call and put pressure on your elected leaders and say, hey, I don't like this. I want you to vote against that. And if you don't vote against that, I'm not electing you next year. Me and all my family, my whole clan. It's not that different than any other issue, regarding like teacher pay or, utility rates or whatever. Like all of these things are vetted through a public process. And I always like to make the comparison to the insular cases. Mm. The insular cases are clearly built in a racist framework. And that has, and I'm not just spouting off like rhetoric here. I mean, this has been questioned in the highest levels of the justice system in the United States, even in Congress. And I mean, it's clear. I think it's been accepted that yes, the insular cases are clearly racist, but the United States federal government still recognizes the insular cases as quote unquote good American law. That's what they call it. Good American law. And so even though they recognize that the insular cases are problematic, they have yet to abolish the insular cases or address the inequity created by the insular cases because back in 1912, was it 1901? Yeah. Back in 1901, this was considered good American law. It's in the books. And I think the bigger problem is, this is my opinion, I think the bigger issue that they're faced with is what are the implications of dismantling the insular cases? There's so much that was built on the premise of the insular cases, that, you know, America would have to face a reckoning if that were to happen, because it changes the relationship that they have with every single U.S. territory. Yes. And so, you know, my thing is, if this is the reason why I like to make this comparison, is that if we know, and even the United States has acknowledged that insular cases are problematic and racist, but they still consider them good American law, then what about our Guam law? You know what I mean? Maybe we knew. I would contest that we knew what we were doing. We knew that we were trying to create a specific class of people, an eligibility, a category for who was going to vote on a political status referendum. We knew that. And it went through the public process and it passed. And so why isn't it good Guam law, despite the ruling in the federal system? And so, you know, I got to ask, like, why are we voting again to answer something we already answered? Yes. Yeah. You know, why do we have to have that in a referendum, let alone a referendum in a midterm election? You know what I mean? Like, what kind of feedback are we anticipating getting from our community in a midterm election?
I mean, even in the context of this bill, maybe in the findings of this in particular, is, you know, this is coming in the midst of a lot of national and international pressures being leveled by the current administration federally, right? As we were saying earlier, with the global context impacts to Venezuela, Greenland, it's like an issue that is present, is in the zeitgeist. So maybe I'm speculating a little bit. Senator Parkinson is just on the closest election to address this issue. Yeah. But that also requires, you know, a fundamental need for more education.
I agree.
You are listening to half of the current team of COD. And as you may know, was reported in the news, we're currently in a budget crisis ourselves, right? So if this goes through the process, we are gearing up for this question at the end of this election. You know, there's still a lot of our electorate who still need to be adequately informed, but you're doing that through a team of 4 people for the whole island.
Right. And, you know, when I think it's indicative of, you know, the climate right now, right? And the political priority. Obviously, the Commission on Decolonization, the work of the Commission on Decolonization to elevate into a fully self-governing status is not a priority of our political leadership. And I think that's clear. Like, you know, we assess this based on the activity and the execution of both the legislative and executive branches. And to be fair to the executive branch, I think that Governor Leon Guerrero, Lieutenant Governor Tenorio have been very committed to the work of the Commission on Decolonization, but they're not tasked with the resource assignment, right? They're tasked with the execution assignment. And so, you know, we get what we get, but we still got to deliver on, you know, we got to deliver to the standards of what our administration has asked of us.
And the budget level we get, which is less than adequate.
Right. And so when you look at Guam, right, you look at Guam's history, when the electorate and our leadership were serious about Commonwealth, what did that investment look like? You know, what did the legislature look like when they had to put their money where their mouth is on political status during the Commonwealth era? I'll tell you what it looked like. Our predecessor, the Commission on Self-Determination, who came before the Commission on Decolonization, they were the one authorized to execute this referendum on Commonwealth and to create the Commonwealth Draft Act for Guam and then put it before the voters, right? That was their charge. During that era, the Commission on Self-Determination was budgeted at approximately $1.1 million for operations. And that was because the demand then was education. How do we get people aware of what it is that they're voting on? And I got to say, kudos to all the voters at that time who came out at like over an 80% rate, something like that, right? About an 80% turnout for the vote, which is crazy. I think that any political analyst on Guam drools at the possibility of an 80% turnout. 80% turnout is banging. That is an awesome participation. And you know, I got to believe that majority of the people who came out of that 80% knew what they were doing, or at least they felt confident in what they were choosing. And so, and to add to it, 80% of that 80% chose to adopt the Commonwealth Draft Act. And so I think, again, it's clear, right? I don't know how much clearer it's got to be. How much clearer do our people got to make it that we desire a change in our political status? If 80% of the people came out to vote for Commonwealth and 80% of that 80% chose Commonwealth, then obviously we want something better than what we got now. But somehow we're still being asked, do you guys want something? You guys want to vote on this? Do you want to change your political status? Yes, man, we do. Just go back into the record. We don't need to have another referendum and have a public hearing on this, but we'll be there. Once they put out the public hearing schedule, we're going to be there. We're going to show up. Yeah, there is a question. We got a question from one of our listeners who texted in. This is a text, right?
No, they called in.
Oh, they called in. Okay, so we had someone called in and asked the question, is there an independence party? The simple answer is no. There is not currently a formal. I believe what the caller is asking is it the independent party, like a political party?
He was saying about there's Republican and Democrat.
Yes.
Yeah,
okay. So normally in most American voter demographics, there's usually the two main parties, the Democratic Party and the Republican Party, often referred to as like the conservative and liberal parties, right? And then there's also usually an independent party. And the independent party is, you're not Democrat, you're not Republican, you're something else. And the independent party, I think, has traditionally been ambiguous because they're always the minority. I think the interesting thing about the presence of, they used to be called the Green Party. I prefer Brown Party personally. Like, we're gonna do one in Guam. Can we call it the Brown Party? But traditionally, I think that because they have historically been the minority of the electorate. It's always been ambiguous. Like there's no, like the Democratic Party has Democratic Party values. So too does the Republican Party. And so usually candidates who run under those tickets, their political values align with the party values. And so the independent party, has not had any, they don't have like independent party values. But there are independent party supporters in Guam for sure. I don't know if you guys remember, but Defuntun Senator Angel Santos, when he first ran as an independent. And there are a number of other candidates who have run under an independent status. I don't know if nobody has been successful. When Senator Angel Santos ran as an independent, he ran for governor, along with former Senator Peter Terlahi. That was I don't know if any of you is old enough to remember the HITA team. That was my favorite personally. That was like the best slogan, HITA. Come on, it even sounds G when you say it real loud. HITA, yeah. I always enjoyed that personally. But yeah, they were unsuccessful in that run at Adelup. And then when Senator Santos ran for senator, he ran as a Democrat and got elected. So yes, the answer is yes. There is an independent party, so to speak, but not necessarily in the way that it's a formal party, right? And then what would have to happen is that we run primaries, right, in Guam. So we have a primary election to sort out the in-house inter-party competition. And so normally like an independent team would move forward into a general without having its own primary. And that unless there is a competition. But then, of course, in a primary, you pick a party and you only vote in that party election. So, if there was a competition within the independent party, then you would have to choose between them and you wouldn't vote in the Democrat or Republican primary. But then in the general, it's just like, every team for themselves, I guess. All right. Anyhow, we got a question or a caller. John is on the line. Hafaday, John, you're on the air with us.
Half a day. I'm sorry. That was originally my question, and I didn't explain it well enough. I meant, is there a Guam independence party?
Oh, you mean like for
the
status?
Yeah, for the status.
I see
because
what you're saying.
When you
Okay.
have Republicans and Democrats, those are mainland parties.
Yeah, very true. They are.
They're
Right.
beholden to the Republican and Democrat parties.
Right. The national parties, correct.
Yeah,
Yeah,
so there's no real voice for Guam. No
Right.
matter how much anyone says they want it, they're still beholden to the national party.
That's a great point.
That's
John,
my
thank you
question.
for the clarification. The simple answer is no, there is no formal party that is, advocates for independence, but there is, within the Commission on Decolonization, there are 3 political status task forces, and those are built for political status education and advocacy. And so there's a statehood task force, there's a free association task force, and then there's an independence task force. And so in that regard, the members of the independence task force, they have a budget from the Guam legislature for their education, and they put together a team of volunteers who basically agree to take on the work and to educate people around the possibilities, the benefits, risks of choosing an independent status. But I guess it's a little different than what you're asking, because it's not necessarily something that impacts an election, right? It's really more toward the end being a political status referendum. So should we get to a point where we're going to vote on political status, their goal is to get you to choose independence, whereas free association is trying to get you to choose free association, statehood trying to get you to choose statehood. So but John, I think that's a great point, because you're right that the 2 parties, even though they are locally executed, Democrat and Republican, are beholden to the national parties, and we've seen the way that the national politics can influence or impact what's happening at a local level. Yes. And so, Guam is not very different than other state jurisdictions in an election, in the sense that they participate in national party engagements, right? So Democratic Party members will go out and participate in the National Democratic Convention, right? Democratic Party Convention. So too will the GOP reps here. They go out to the GOP national thing in the States, right? So I think it's a fair question, and unfortunately one we don't have like a real cut and clean answer for, at least in the political realm. But I think that's a great point, right? That it's I like the framework that John put this in, right? In asking the question about, how does our our kind of tie to national politics, even at a local level, through these party affiliations, how does that change the voice of Guam, right? Because I think that's a good point, that a political party that is advocating for independence is completely kind of cut off, or not cut off, but in a silo away from the national influence. Yes. And I think party conversations are always going to be influenced by a national level, because the whole framework is built around the partisan system.
Yeah, and just a note for the unfortunate reality of how our delegates here in Guam go for either party. At that level, right, there's, telecasts, right, broadcasting of the whole event. Only in that instance do our delegates nominate the party's official candidate for president. But when it comes to the actual election, every time we see that question on the ballot every 4 years, right, it's a glorified survey. It's a straw poll.
Yeah, that's that one definitely rubs me the wrong way. The for the hell of it question.
Yeah, and then we're always on the national broadcast, like the Electoral College map. Right. All the states have their votes, but what does a place like Guam have to say? We're the predictor.
Yeah, we're the prediction of the tiebreaker.
Yes,
that's always the funny one to me. Like, if we'll let you guys vote if there's a tie, we'll let you know if we need you, Guam.
My other concern was that when we send our delegate, even though they're non-voting,
right,
we always send them as a Republican or a Democrat.
Correct.
It's never, because sometimes to get people's attention, because I know they have these issues in Puerto Rico, and
right, that
if you're going as a Republican or Democrat, it's okay, but when you go with the sole purpose of defending Guam, I mean, that I know that I don't question the delegates' faithfulness to Guam, but when they go as a Republican or Democrat, it's okay. You're going to follow the Republican or Democrat nomination because I appreciate the standing up for the drilling,
right?
But when the push to get elected as the delegate to go to the Congress is that I'm a huge supporter of Donald Trump or I'm a huge supporter of Biden or someone like something like that, that shouldn't matter, and that's a selling point leaving the island. That just seems to be a problem, not with the individual that's running, because I understand why they run as a different party, but then Guam isn't necessarily their first concern, or they're not pushing that my concern is for Guam.
Right.
And
I mean, I think that's a fair point.
That was what I was curious about.
Yeah, I John. I mean, I think that's a great frame of questioning, and I think that it is a fair point, a fair question, a fair insinuation, even if you want to go that far. But I definitely feel like yes, you can't necessarily blame an individual in how they deal from point A to point B on a campaign trail. But I also would say that we've seen in the past different delegates do their thing in different ways, party affiliation or not. I would argue that we've had delegates in the past who have been very pro Guam regardless of their political affiliation. You couldn't. I think you could argue that somebody like former delegate Ben Blas and former delegate Robert Underwood had a lot of a very similar framework in regard to advocating for Guam, immune of their party affiliation. Obviously they did it in different ways. General Ben Blas was obviously a very clear supporter of military in Guam, but he also was very clear about his advocacy for the betterment of Guam and trying to use that as a mechanism. I think Dr. Underwood did it in a different way. He was very staunch about, the being critical of the militarization of the island, but, still advocating for similar rights and considerations for the people of Guam that were very much like Congressman Blas. They're two very different leaders. But I think it's fair to say that they clearly had their party affiliations, but they also had their Guam values in line, right? I don't think that that's the same for every delegate. I mean, I would argue that this delegate and our previous delegate, St. Nicholas, had a totally different take on how they were going to advocate for Guam, what they were and weren't willing to do. But I agree with you. I think that it's great. It's encouraging to see our current delegate take a stand on deep sea mining and be consistent with the rest of our political leadership, minus A.G. Moylan. Except for him, he always has to be the odd man out. But I think that it's encouraging. But I also think it's still kind of early in the game. I don't know if you caught the hearing on deep sea mining with CNMI Guam and the metals company that's trying to fast track permitting. But I thought that our delegate started open pretty strong. I thought he ended pretty weak.
I was proud of it.
I was super proud in the beginning. I got to tell you, I was really proud in the beginning. Kind of lost me at the end there because I felt like he still kind of left the door ajar. He was like, "Oh, we're gonna take this hard stance," you know what I mean? In the end, he's like, "Well, we just want to be included." I'm like, whoa, wait a minute. Are we taking a hard stance or are we not? But again, I think that's what we've been on this whole time, is that deep sea mining is an issue that should be decided by the impact community and the impact community alone. We're the ones that are going to deal with it, and we should be leading the charge. Whether we decide that we want to exploit our natural resources in this way, then we will set the terms for such. But I think the problem with the way that it's happening now is that this is being dictated through an EO, and the United States is flexing its use of us as a possession, and we're kind of on the sidelines, just kind of waiting to see what happens, and then we're gonna quick fire mitigate when it all goes down and we realize we don't have a choice.
It is kind of sad that a bunch of legislators on the mainland that couldn't find Guam on a map have so much to say about.
Oh yeah, they always
the
do.
mine.
Oh, they always do. They had the same thing to say right after World War II. So, I mean, yeah, it's not. I don't think nobody here is surprised. It's just frustrating, and I think we're tired.
But I appreciate it. Like, those were questions that I didn't understand with the governance of Guam, and I appreciate you taking the time to explain it.
Thank you, John. Thank you for the call. Thanks for the questions. I think it was a great conversation. Have a great day.
You too. Viva Guam.
Viva. All right, man, we're coming up on 15 minutes. I didn't even get into the meat of what I'm mad about with Parkinson. Anyway, we're going to jump into it. We got about 15 minutes left. We're going to try to quick fire this thing. So the second bill that Parkinson is asserting or proposing is bill number 242-38. Titled Relative to Removing Ancestry-Based Voter Restrictions in Guam's Political Status Plebiscite and Ensuring Compliance with the 15th Amendment to the United States Constitution. So I'm going to give you the real fast and dirty breakdown of this. Basically, what he's trying to do is the bill is proposing to amend the current law that defines voter eligibility for a political status referendum as native inhabitant. And so the definition of native inhabitant is anyone who became a U.S. citizen in 1950 via the Organic Act of Guam and their descendants. So essentially anybody who had their political status decided for them, these are the people that are owed the right to decide for themselves. And so this bill or this law was challenged in federal court and lost at the Ninth Circuit Court level after subsequent to a lawsuit by a man named Arnold Dave Davis. And since that time, the referendum has just kind of been on hold because it doesn't comply with the orders by the court. And so Senator Parkinson says that he is trying to eliminate that obstacle and fast track a referendum. And so basically he's going to open up the referendum to any eligible voter on Guam to decide what Guam's political status path will be. So what's not changing in the law is that this will be a non-binding referendum, which, you know, is also kind of, I think fundamentally it's challenging, right? Like we're talking about a half a century of injustice, right? Guam has been a colony for 500 years under first the Spanish and then under violent occupation by the Japanese Imperial Army during World War II, and then by the Americans for about 127 years. And so Guam has been non-self-governing for half a century. Guam has had their right to decide their political destiny and political status for half a century. The international framework for decolonization and political self-determination recognizes the rights of colonized people to determine their status, and have their free, prior, and informed consent sought. The United States, however, has never wholeheartedly supported Guam's quest for political self-determination. And I think we can see that based on all the different efforts by the Chamorro people and the citizens of Guam to, raise their level of self-government and even in a lot of ways just fully participate as an equal within the U.S. political framework. I think my issue with this proposal by Parkinson is that I believe that it erases us as a people, it erases our history, it disregards our history, which I think is problematic, right? I think that the intent of this framework, this international framework, is restorative justice, right? What we're doing is we're saying that this is a collective right of colonized people to enter into a path of healing and reconciliation, right? What we're attempting to do is to heal the wounds of the past so that we can move forward in a cohesive way, right? In a unified way. What I don't like about this conversation is I don't like the way that it has been conducted in public as divisive, and I think it's been a very destructive way to have what I think is a very important human conversation, humanitarian conversation. The framework, and Dave Davis, I gotta say, he was one of the major violators, guilty parties here. Dave Davis deliberately made this a divisive conversation by saying that, this is a racist attempt to, withhold access to a referendum to people for no good reason other than their race. But I don't think that the people of Guam, when we enacted this bill into law, I don't think that we were ever intended on racial discrimination. I think our intent was to address a historical wrong and then proceed collectively as a community. People always say that to me, like, well, I don't want to leave anybody out. This is something that we should all do together. And I agree with that. I really believe that, political status resolution has to be a collective community effort. But I also believe that we must right the wrongs of the past if we're going to genuinely move forward as a community. We can't leave these things unresolved. What are we supposed to do? We're just supposed to forget that, we've been living under an inferior status, that we've had this status imposed on us, that we were sovereign for 3,500 years. And then all of a sudden we're not. And then now we're just supposed to forget about all of that and then proceed, with kind of at the starting point is our disadvantage. I don't agree with that. Now, yes, I acknowledge that, in defining voter eligibility in this way as native inhabitant, that yes, we are excluding a certain population of Guam from this very big, important decision. However, it is impossible to see that vision to fruition, right? To see that choice, that status into fruition without the collective community. And so I believe that it is not an exclusive process. I think what we're doing is that we're respecting the right of these people. We're acknowledging this history of discrimination against them, this unfair history. And we're trying to make this right. We're trying to say you matter. What has happened to you matters. And we're not going to disregard it. We're going to give you a chance to say what it is that you want, because nobody asked you for the last 500 years. And we're going to give you this chance to say what it is that you want. And then we're going to come together as a whole and we're going to figure this thing out. And I think that that's a beautiful thing. Personally, I think that that's the best way for us to move forward. I believe that that is our best shot at not only getting it done, but making it work. And so I personally, I refute this effort by Senator Parkinson to pass this bill 242-38. And we're going to get a chance. We're going to get our chance. The team just informed me this morning that Parkinson's bill 242-38 just got scheduled for a public hearing.
Yeah, it's a Wednesday, February 18th, at the Guam Congress Building at 9 a.m. So this measure has been formally referred to the Committee on Federal and Foreign Affairs, currently chaired by Senator Lujan. So when it was reported in the news through the Post, Senator Lujan was asked about, how many more hearings after this. So he's open to the fact that there may be a need for more than just the first one. And we hope so, because this is a very nuanced and complicated
I really
issue.
do hope so. I mean, I thought it was problematic. I think it's always problematic, these 9 a.m. weekday hearings. Who got time for that? You know what I mean? Who got time? I mean, look at this housing situation. This housing allowance thing. This has real implications. This impacts people in a very real way. But most of the people that it impacts, at 9 a.m., they're working their job that they need to work so they can pay the rent that they can't afford. You know what I'm saying? So, like, how is this conducive to getting, a feel for where the community's at on this issue if you're not going to make it accessible to them? So I agree with you. I hope that Senator Lujan and the members of the committee will consider this as they proceed in the public hearing schedule. And it'll be great. It'll be great if we can have multiple hearings on this, because it's important. My party just called me out because I said that nobody got time for that. And he said, yeah, you do. I should have prefaced that. I should have prefaced that nobody got time for that unless this is your job. Well, Thanks, Pari, for the reminder. And just in case you ever wondered if I'm actually doing my job, I show up, guys. I'm showing up. I'm showing up and doing what we're supposed to do. But yeah, thanks to everybody who has, has made the commitment to kind of show up and be heard and participate in the process. I think that that's a really important piece. So if you're out there right now, you got a pen near you, February 18th, which is a Wednesday. That is 3 Wednesdays from, this Wednesday, 4 Wednesdays from now. All right. So February 18th, mark it on your calendar, 9 a.m. At the Guam legislature or the Guam Congress building. The question is going to be heard on this bill to open up voter eligibility in a political status referendum. I think it's a problem, guys. I just be straight up with you. I really believe that there are a lot of people who side with the integrity of this act, right? This is not just about, to me, this is bigger than the Constitution. I get it. I get that the Constitution is supposed to be our baseline, our North Star. You know what I mean? The Constitution is built to protect every American's rights. The problem is that it does not apply to us in the same way that it applies to a birthright citizen in the continental U.S. And that's just the reality of statutory citizenship, of being a citizen, a U.S. citizen, but you live in a territory. And I think that it's important to recognize that, this is a unique situation for the people of Guam in the sense that, yes, there is this political inequity and this long, kind of history of America disregarding the rights of our people. But we also have to respect that the Samoa people have such a long storied history. We're the oldest civilization in this part of the Pacific. We're the first people to settle in the Micronesian region 4,000 years ago. I mean, it's got to mean something to more than just me. I know I'm not the only crazy person out there.
And I just like to say I appreciate the fact that you were saying earlier that this has been framed as a divisive issue.
Right.
I could understand how people may feel seeing this as an exclusionary action, but it's also important to know that I personally ask this to everyone who still has not fully understood the context and the history of this issue to learn more, because it is nuanced, it is complicated.
Right.
It's a shared experience, yes, but this is a chance for our indigenous people here, the Chamorro people, to really exercise the right that has been continuously denied to us.
Right. And I mean, if the way I look at it is if you are Tsamoru, then this should rub you the wrong way. It should bother you. It should bother you enough to do something about it. And if you're not Tsamoru, but you call this place home, then you're connected to us some way, somehow. And I got to ask you, if you're not Tsamoru, but you call this place home and we are important to you, stand with us. Support us. This is our moment of need. This is our moment. This is where you're going to show us what time it is. You know what I mean? Are we fair weather friends, or are you really our family? I think that nuts and bolts, the thing that I have a big problem with is that the principle of self-determination is to ascertain the will of the people, right? And granted, notwithstanding, right, that it is the right of the colonized people to decolonize, is the right of the people who have never been asked what their political status preference will be to ask those people. But we also have to face the reality of what time it is right now in Guam. I mean, we're talking about this. The housing crisis is only an issue because our population is drastically changing. And our population is increasing at an exponential rate that we know we can't keep up with. And what are the rules and the eligibility for voting in a public election in Guam? You just have to be living in Guam for 30 days.
Yeah, before an election.
Yeah, 30 days before an election. That means there's more than enough time for somebody to register to vote today. They just moved here today. They didn't even have to start today. They can wait till August. I'm going to move to Guam in August so that I can vote in this referendum. I mean, that's crazy to think about that in that way.
Yeah, and there are just potential ramifications for someone who decides to vote on such a fundamental issue.
Right.
And maybe they are not as informed as they should be.
Right. And I don't think it's as cut and dry as just being like, well, this status seems better than that status. You know, I think that there are a lot of things that people need to understand before they make a decision on our permanent political status. And this is like, we got one shot to do this, right? That's the deal. You don't pick a status and then change your mind 10 years later and be like, oh, we changed our mind. We don't like that. We want to be a state now. Like, no, that's not how it works. And so, you know, it's important that I feel like our community needs to vet this thing, right? We need to really consider what are the implications, ramifications of whatever status it is that we choose. But, you know, I think before we even get to that point, at what point do we decide as a community that humanity is our priority? You know, that dignity is our priority. I believe that that's where it starts. You know, we're not going to treat each other with dignity. Then what are we doing, man? Like, this thing is just waiting to blow up in our faces and fall apart. Anyhow, I could do this all day, but we are at the top of the hour and we have reached our time. Byron, I want to thank you for coming in to co-host with me. Sorry for hogging the mic.
Okay.
I tend to do that from time to time, guys. I tend to do that. Ulysses, thank you for holding us down in the production.
Yes.
Thanks to BK and our friends over at Glimpses for putting the show on. And I want to thank our callers. We had a great question and call from John. Also, Joe Malik was on there. Thanks to everybody who's been tuning in. We'll be excited to see you next week. Same bat time, same bat channel. 10 a.m. to noon every Monday on Wave 105.1 FM. My name is Melvin. This is Byron. We are the Commission on Decolonization, and we will catch you next time.
Heartbroken by the tragic loss of Alex Purdy that occurred yesterday in Minneapolis. We extend our